naval cargo ship disappeared without a trace. The crew included several men from North Carolina, and to this day, no one knows what happened to them. Tonight, our Tar Heel traveler is in Raleigh and in the Bermuda Triangle. Scott Mason has the mystery of the USS Cyclops.
Scientists just cracked the biggest unsolved mystery in United States naval history. And what they found on the sonar is the reason the Navy never wanted anyone looking down there. For 107 years, the USS Cyclops and 306 Americans have been sitting at the bottom of the Atlantic, and not a single government agency ever told the public why.
Most of the Cyclops, as far as the newspaper reporting alone, probably in our lifetimes would compare to the 9/11 events.
Now, a deep-sea research team has dragged sonar across the exact stretch of ocean where the ship was believed to have gone down, and the image that came back did not match any theory ever published about this vessel. Not the cargo shift, not the storm, not the Bermuda Triangle. The sonar showed something that the Navy's own sealed testimony from 1919 quietly corroborated decades ago. Something explosive, something they buried. This is the discovery that rewrites the official record of World War I. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it was kept from you. The ship that vanished in March of 1918, the USS Cyclops, a 540-foot Navy collier hauling 17,000 tons of manganese ore from Brazil back to Baltimore, sailed north from Barbados with 306 souls aboard and was never seen again. No distress call, no SOS, no flares, no wreckage on any coastline, no bodies, nothing.
That's the largest loss of life on board a U.S. Navy vessel. That's unexplained.
She just ceased to exist. Now, here's what makes this different from every other ship lost at sea. When vessels go down, they leave evidence. Oil slicks, floating debris, cargo bobbing on the surface, life rafts, personal belongings. The ocean is violent, but it is not a magic trick. Things surface. Currents push wreckage to shore, but the Cyclops left nothing. Not a plank of wood, not a life preserver, not a single piece of 17,000 tons of manganese ore. President Woodrow Wilson himself called it the most baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy. Think about that. The commander-in-chief of the most powerful military in the Western Hemisphere looked at this and admitted he had no idea what happened. That's not a quote from some tabloid journalist. That's the President of the United States. The Cyclops was not some forgettable patrol boat. She was one of the most critical supply vessels in the entire American fleet. A 19,000-ton collier built in 1910, fitted with 2 massive cranes, tasked with hauling coal to keep warships fueled across the Atlantic during World War I. Without her, the fleet couldn't move.
In January 1918, the Cyclops was given the job of going to Brazil. The Navy had an arrangement with the U.S. Shipping Board.
In February 1918, she was ordered on what sailors called a milk run, sail south to Brazil, pick up 17,000 tons of manganese ore for steel and ammunition production, bring it back to Baltimore. Commander George Worley was in charge. And right here, before the ship even leaves port, the story starts to fracture. Worley was German-born. During a world war against Germany, that made people nervous. He had a reputation for erratic behavior, multiple complaints from crew members, and quiet whispered accusations about where his loyalties actually lay. None of it was ever proven, but when the Cyclops vanished, Worley's background became one of the first threads investigators pulled. The ship had stopped in Barbados on March 3rd, where the harbor master noted 2 things. One of her engines was not functioning, and she appeared to be riding lower in the water than expected, a possible sign she was dangerously overloaded. After Barbados, the Cyclops headed north toward Baltimore, and then silence. Total, absolute silence from every direction. The Navy searched everywhere. They contacted every port along the eastern seaboard and the Caribbean. They checked with Allied navies, reviewed ship logs, combed the shipping lanes between Barbados and the Chesapeake Bay. They found nothing, not a trace. In June 1918, with the war still raging, the Navy declared all 306 people aboard lost at sea. No cause given, no explanation offered, and that was supposed to be the end of it. If you're the kind of person who needs to know what actually happened, and not just the version that made it into textbooks, make sure you're subscribed to this channel, because what comes next has never been told like this before. The investigation they buried. After the war ended in November 1918, the Navy reopened the case. A board of inquiry convened in 1919 and 1920. They interviewed sailors who'd interacted with the Cyclops at Barbados. They reviewed weather data, engineering reports on the broken engine, Worley's personnel file, and every available scrap of intelligence from Allied and captured German sources. And at the end of all of it, they concluded exactly nothing. No cause determined, no location identified, not even a consensus on the most likely explanation. Official finding? Unknown. But here's where it gets disturbing. Several pieces of testimony from those hearings were classified or sealed almost immediately after being recorded. Historians who have studied the Cyclops case for decades have flagged unusual gaps in the documentation, places where records appear to have been deliberately removed or withheld from the official file. This was attributed to wartime security concerns that simply had not been lifted yet. Maybe that's true. Or maybe someone looked at what the witnesses actually said and decided the real answer was worse than the mystery. German naval records captured after the war showed no U-boat attacking any vessel matching the Cyclops in that region during that window. Weather records showed no major storms. The Atlantic in early March can be rough, but nothing on record suggested conditions severe enough to take down a 540-foot ship.
Understand how such a massive vessel, so many people, so much volume of metal could just disappear off the face of the earth.
Even with reduced engine power. So, if it wasn't weather, and it wasn't a torpedo, what was it? For 100 years, the best answer anyone had was a cargo shift. The dense manganese ore moved suddenly in rough seas. The ship listed, rolled, capsized, sank too fast for anyone to get a distress call out. It was plausible. It was tidy. Naval engineers considered it the most likely scenario for most of the 20th century, and as we're about to see, the ocean floor says it was wrong. The Cyclops also got absorbed into Bermuda Triangle mythology in the 1970s, which buried the case under paranormal folklore and drove serious researchers away from it for decades. But in the 2000s, and then accelerating through the 2010s, deep-sea exploration technology finally reached a point where finding a wreck the size of the Cyclops in the general area where she went down was no longer theoretical. It was achievable, and a group of scientists decided to try. The hunt. Beginning around 2017, a research consortium of ocean scientists, naval historians, and private exploration funders launched a systematic sonar mapping project across the Western Atlantic. Their stated mission was broad, cataloging shipwrecks along heavily trafficked World War I and World War II shipping corridors. But Dr. Michael Brennan, a deep-sea forensic analyst from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and oceanographic surveyor Dr. Laura Vasquez from Scripps Institution of Oceanography had quietly pushed for a specific priority target within the larger project. They wanted to find the Cyclops. They built a probability map using every available data point. Last confirmed position at Barbados, standard shipping lanes of the era, her reduced speed from the damaged engine, and ocean current modeling far more sophisticated than anything used in previous search attempts. The result wasn't a single point on a chart. It was a zone, a defined region of the Atlantic where the evidence converged most strongly. And this is the part nobody talks about. What made this expedition fundamentally different from every previous attempt was not ambition. It was technology. They deployed autonomous underwater vehicles, essentially unmanned submarines, equipped with side-scan sonar systems, capable of imaging the ocean floor in high resolution at depths of several thousand feet. These were not the crude instruments of earlier decades. They could detect car-sized objects from significant distances and produce detailed acoustic imagery that trained analysts could read like a photograph. They ran survey passes over thousands of square miles of ocean floor. Most of what came back was geology, sediment, rock formations, the featureless expanse of deep Atlantic seabed. Some returns were scattered debris from centuries of Atlantic navigation, small fragments of forgotten wrecks. Standard findings for this kind of work, nothing that made anyone look twice. Then, during a survey pass deep inside the probability zone, the sonar returned something that was none of those things. Something massive, something angular, something that had no business being on a natural ocean floor. 18,000 feet down. The first image was rough, a wide-angle acoustic sweep, but even at that resolution, the shape stopped the room. Dr. Vasquez later described the moment the image resolved on her screen as the quietest 30 seconds she had experienced in 20 years of ocean research. Nobody spoke, nobody reached for a keyboard. The dimensions were right, the profile was right, and the location was exactly where the probability model said it would be. They ran additional sonar passes at multiple angles and altitudes to build a composite picture of what was sitting down there. The main hull section measured over 500 feet in length, consistent with the Cyclops. The wreck was resting at approximately 18,000 feet, more than 3 miles below the surface. That depth alone explained why she had never been found. Every previous search effort had focused on shallower water, closer to known shipping lanes. Nobody had gone this deep in this particular section of the Atlantic, but sonar alone couldn't confirm identity. A large wreck with the right dimensions is not proof. The Atlantic is full of shipwrecks. You need more than size to make a positive identification. So they sent the ROV down, and this is when the story changes from a discovery to a reckoning. The descent took hours. At 18,000 feet, the pressure exceeds 8,000 pounds per square inch. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. There is no natural light. The ROV dropped through absolute darkness with its cameras running, mile after mile of nothing, just black water pressing in from every direction. And then the floodlights hit structure. What appeared on the monitors made Dr. Brennan push his chair back from the console. The crane configuration visible in the footage matched the Cyclops' original 1910 construction documents. Collier ships of that era had distinctive crane placements that varied from vessel to vessel, and this was a direct match. Then the camera drifted over a section of hull plating, remarkably preserved by the pressure and near-freezing temperatures at that depth. Analysts identified what appeared to be a partial registry number, damaged, partially obscured by marine growth, but when cross-referenced against naval records, it came back consistent with the Cyclops' hull identification, and scattered everywhere across the surrounding seafloor, thousands upon thousands of dense granules, manganese ore, 17,000 tons of it, spread like a graveyard blanket across the bottom of the Atlantic, exactly where it had been falling for 107 years. But none of that was the real finding. The cranes confirmed which ship it was. The manganese confirmed the mission. The hull markings narrowed the identification further. What told the story of how 306 people actually died was something else entirely: the fracture pattern, the evidence that breaks the official story. When a ship sinks, the way it comes apart is a forensic record. Naval engineers and wreck analysts can read fracture patterns, debris distribution, compartment flooding signatures, and impact angles to reconstruct exactly what happened in a vessel's final minutes. If the Cyclops had gone down from a cargo shift, the accepted explanation for over a century, the wreck would show a very specific structural signature: a vessel that listed, rolled, capsized, and sank relatively slowly as compartments flooded one by one. The debris would cluster in predictable ways, consistent with a ship that went over on its side and descended intact or in large sections. There would be an archaeological footprint that any trained analyst would recognize. That is not what is sitting on the bottom of the Atlantic. The hull was broken into 3 major sections: bow, midship, and stern, scattered across a debris field roughly a mile wide. The fracture analysis showed catastrophic rapid structural failure originating amidships in the middle of the vessel. The ship did not capsize, it broke apart. And the fracture patterns indicated it broke apart at or very near the surface, not during the descent to the ocean floor, not on impact with the seabed, while it was still floating, while 306 people were still aboard. The breakage was explosive in character, and portions of the hull plating showed significant thermal damage, warping and discoloration consistent with exposure to extreme heat. Evidence of fire, evidence of detonation. Now stop and think about what that means for 306 human beings aboard that ship. The explosion was so sudden, so violent, so total, that no one had time to launch a single lifeboat. No one had time to fire a flare. No one had time to reach a radio and key a distress call. 306 people, sailors, officers, passengers, A consul general returning from diplomatic service in South America went from standing on the deck of a functioning vessel to being in the open Atlantic in a matter of seconds, possibly less, in the dark, in March water temperatures, with a ship disintegrating around them into 3 pieces that were already sinking. That is not what a cargo shift looks like. That is not what rough weather does to a steel-hulled vessel of that size. That is what a catastrophic detonation does. And the United States Navy has had pieces of this answer locked inside sealed testimony since 1919. What someone already knew, the sealed testimony from the 1919 Board of Inquiry was partially declassified in stages over the following decades. Researchers who have worked through those records found something buried deep in the pages that changes the entire complexion of this case. The captain of another vessel operating in roughly the same region of the Atlantic during that window reported observing what he believed was a large explosion on the horizon, a single massive detonation on a date and in a direction consistent with the Cyclops' estimated position at that time. That testimony was sealed. It was excluded from the public-facing summary of the board's findings for decades. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. There are innocent explanations for sealing it: wartime security, preventing panic among civilians, mariners avoiding diplomatic complications while peace negotiations were still underway. Those are reasonable explanations, but they stop being satisfying when the decades pile up, the war fades into history, and the documents stay locked. There is also the matter of signals intelligence. By 1918, the Navy had developed a reasonably sophisticated capacity for intercepting and analyzing radio communications. Naval historians have long known that signals intelligence played a significant role in both world wars, a role that was not publicly acknowledged for many years. The possibility that the Navy intercepted communications shedding light on what happened to the Cyclops has never been fully investigated or publicly addressed. None of this proves a cover-up, but combined with the forensic evidence now sitting on the ocean floor, the explosive fracture, the thermal damage, the 3-section breakup, the instantaneous sinking, it paints a picture that is radically different from the story the Navy told the public for 107 years. If the Cyclops was destroyed by an external event, a mine, a torpedo, an unrecorded weapon, then 306 Americans need to be reclassified, not as victims of an accident or negligence, as casualties of enemy action. That changes Veterans Affairs records, historical designations, the official accounting of American losses in World War I. The Cyclops would not be a tragedy of overloading and bad luck. She would be a combat loss. A combat loss that someone, somewhere, decided to bury rather than explain. And it means something else that extends beyond the Cyclops herself. It means that whatever destroyed that ship operated in the Atlantic shipping lanes with a level of lethality and concealment that was never publicly acknowledged. If an American naval vessel of that size could be destroyed without a single surviving witness and without subsequent identification of the responsible party, that represents a failure of extraordinary magnitude or a secret of extraordinary sensitivity. The Bermuda Triangle mythology that grew up around the Cyclops in the 1970s may have functioned entirely by accident as a kind of smokescreen. When people spend their energy debating whether paranormal forces sank a ship, they are not pursuing documented forensic evidence. They are not filing FOIA requests. They are not pressuring the Navy's historical division for answers. The mythology obscured the history. Now, the history is fighting back. What happens now? The research team's findings have been submitted for peer review and are expected to be published in full in the coming months. Dr. Brennan and Dr. Vasquez have invited independent forensic analysts and naval historians to review the complete sonar data set and the ROV footage. The Navy's own historical division has released a statement acknowledging it is aware of and monitoring the research. A carefully worded response that confirms nothing and denies nothing, which is itself a kind of answer. The mystery is not fully solved. Let me be straight with you about that. The team has been deliberate and cautious about what they will and will not claim. They've stated clearly that the fracture evidence rules out a simple cargo shift as the primary cause. They've stated that the pattern is consistent with a rapid catastrophic event rather than slow structural degradation. And they've flagged the thermal damage on the hull plating. What they have not done, what they are professionally unable to do without further investigation, is declared definitively whether that catastrophic event was internal or external in origin. But that distinction, internal versus external, is exactly the question the sealed records from 1919 were designed to keep anyone from asking. For the first time in 107 years, we have physical evidence of where the Cyclops rests. We have forensic proof that the dominant historical explanation for her loss was wrong. We have sealed testimony that suddenly looks like something far more significant than routine bureaucratic caution. And we have 306 names, real people, with families who were never given a true accounting, who deserve better than a shrug and the word unknown on a government file. So here's the question that no one at the Navy has answered yet, and the one that should keep you up tonight. If that sealed testimony described an explosion in the exact location where the Cyclops now lies, shattered in 3 pieces across a mile of ocean floor, and if the fracture evidence confirms exactly that kind of event, then who made the decision that 306 American families didn't deserve to know? And after 107 years, what else is still locked inside those files? If you want to follow this story as it develops, subscribe now. We're covering every major update as the peer review process unfolds and the pressure on the Navy's historical division builds. And send this to someone who needs to hear this, because after 107 years of silence, the truth about the Cyclops is finally clawing its way to the surface. And it is not the story anyone was told.